Hello, good evening and welcome to BizFirst in Focus. I'm Nadim Majid. I'd like to read a section of a report. The predictability, efficiency and openness of regulatory procedures are critical to enhance their effectiveness. In the absence of these features, procedures will fail to generate expected outcomes, and such opaque processes are also prone to abuse. This is a reality that we are very much in touch with here in Sri Lanka, but today we're going to be talking about regulatory ineffectiveness, specifically to do with import tax exemption schemes. We're joined by Subhashini Abesing, a research director at Verite Research. Subhashini, thank you very much again for coming onto the show. So this policy note by that you've compiled, Wading Through Murky Waters, a case study of regulatory ineffectiveness in Sri Lanka's import tax exemption schemes. What were the key findings that you unearthed?
Yeah, so first let me give a brief background on what import tax exemption schemes are and what is the objective of the scheme, and then go to discuss the key problems. So in Sri Lanka, actually taxes collected at the point of import is an important source of government revenue. Nearly 50% of government tax revenue is actually collected by Sri Lanka Customs at the point of import from imports. Around 20% of this is collected from taxes only on imports, and the balance from value added tax and NBT, which is paid by importers as well as domestic producers. Although this is an important source of government revenue, a key problem is for the importer, this increases the cost of products that they are importing. So it can increase basically your cost of cost of raw materials, machinery substantially, and make you uncompetitive in the domestic market when you are trying to sell these products. So one of the ways the government tries to ensure, especially for selected products which the government feels that the domestic producers should have access to at a lower cost, is introduce tax exemption schemes. So through these exemption schemes, the importer can make significant savings, and as a result they are quite attractive and appealing. So what we looked at was so there is a multitude of such import exemption tax exemption schemes in Sri Lanka. We looked at a few, especially 3 schemes that provide relief from the import duty, import cess and value added tax. So we selected these 3 tax exemption schemes in relation to agriculture, especially high-tech agriculture equipment. So obviously this is a very good incentive. We badly need to increase productivity of agriculture in Sri Lanka. So we felt this is a great scheme, but we wanted to see how, basically we initially started by saying we want to see how effectively this scheme is utilized by the agriculture producers in Sri Lanka, and what is the level of absorption of high-tech agriculture equipment.
Subhashini, specifically with the agriculture sector, did you find that these import tax exemption schemes were effective?
So one of the major problems we had when we went into the scheme to identify the effectiveness of the schemes is lack of data, which was surprising. So one of the problems that we identified is difficulty in getting information and data, especially because when you give tax exemptions, the government is going to lose revenue. And as we all know, Sri Lanka government is one of the governments that has one of the lowest tax to GDP ratios in the world, and they're desperately to increase their tax revenue. So any exemption scheme given is revenue loss to the government. So one of the things that we wanted to see is we expect the government to have data when they introduce a tax exemption scheme, what are the imports that came into the country under this tax exemption scheme. So one of the difficulties that we had, and also it is important just not only to make sure that it is effective and are the relevant beneficiaries making use of it, and secondly to detect misuse. Because when a country imposes a large amount of taxes at the point of import, obviously there will be a lot of people who would like to put their products under this scheme, in order to evade the taxes.
So it is more prone to abuse. With the data, is it just that the data is there but you're unable to access it, or there is no data and the decision is completely arbitrary?
So there are two problems in relation to the data that we encountered. So generally all these tax exemption schemes, there is a procedure introduced to ensure that the scheme is not misused. So for example, the Gazette would say, look, you can import not just for agriculture equipment, for any product in that exemption list. There is an identified organization that basically oversees that subject area, from which you have to get a recommendation letter. So in agriculture, it will be the Ministry of Agriculture, and for Ayurveda products, it will be the Department of Ayurveda. So various institutes identified, just to make sure the people who import these products genuinely for the objective stated in the Gazette are the ones who benefit from this. Then first question we asked was, okay, we'll go to the respective agencies to identify how do they ensure that these are genuine importers. What is the eligibility criteria? What are the documents that I have to submit in order to demonstrate that I am actually importing genuinely for the purpose intended? So what was interesting is we could not find any documented procedure. So this is not just in relation to import tax exemptions, this is a problem we have encountered in many other areas as well.
So interesting but not surprising.
Interesting but not surprising. Actually, it continues to be proved that Sri Lankan government agencies introduce various processes saying you need this approval, you need this recommendation letter, but you don't document a process saying, okay, these are the documents you need to identify, this is how we evaluate, and this is the officer who is in charge of this, and this is the timeline. How, for business, it's really important to know how long does it take. So what we realized is to find this information, this is not on any website, and you can't basically get these instructions over the phone either. You have to basically visit the relevant institute to get this information. And what is interesting is, because the document is not process is not documented, it is in the head of some officer. And if this officer is not absent, which was one of the experiences we had, and that means no one else in that department or division is able to guide you through the process either. So that is one of the problems we encountered. And then secondly, we wanted to basically find out, is there data? So the document not being in place and information not being available, we realized makes this process prone to abuse. And then we wanted to see, let's check the data, because this scheme has been in place for several years now, to see what are the products that are imported under this. So we went to the Ministry of Agriculture. They gave us a list of organizations and equipment for which they have given approval letters. But that is not the final list of actually what came into the country. So ideally that final list is available with Sri Lanka Customs, because upon the recommendation letter received, the customs needs to provide approval that this person is eligible to import and release the product free of duty or free of the other taxes. So we basically contacted Sri Lanka Customs and wanted to know whether we can find import statistics under each tax exemption scheme. Then we were told, basically give us the HS codes of the products. So if you're a trader, you know every traded product is identified internationally by something called an HS code. So normally taxes imposed on the products are decided by the HS code, and Sri Lanka Customs Statistics has both the HS code and the product description. So but we look at the gazettes which has all the list of products. None of these products are identified by HS codes. So as a person who's requesting this information, I have the gazette, I have the list of products, but I don't have the HS codes, and I'm not a professional who knows HS codes, right?
This lack of sort of clarity this just the general arbitrariness of the entire import tax exemption scheme process. Just there is massive room for discretionary powers to be exercised, just opening the doors for corruption.
This is exactly one of the things we discovered. When the process is not documented, especially process of approving or giving recommendation is not documented, that gives immense room for discretionary decision making by the bureaucrat, because it's very difficult as a business person to challenge that decision and to say, okay, if it was documented, I have the right to say I submitted all the documents, I gave all the criteria, and then why
and you can ask for a justification.
Exactly.
On that note, we're going for a short commercial break. When we come back, we'll look at how these sort of regulatory inefficiencies are impacting Sri Lanka's global economic image. Welcome back to Infocus. We're in conversation with Subhashini Abesinghe, Research Director at Verite Research. Subhashini, we saw recently how the ratings agency Moody's had sort of given Sri Lanka a negative outlook, a B1 negative rating. And if some of the news reports, according to some of the news reports, we'd been lumped in with countries that are in very precarious situations, like Turkey. Meanwhile, Sri Lanka's performance in the last few years on the Ease of Doing Business Index of the World Bank has also seen a slide. What is the sort of contribution that regulatory inefficiencies in import tax exemption schemes, for example, have towards this negative perception of Sri Lanka among international investors?
Yes, actually this is one of the problems in terms of investment and competitiveness of the Sri Lankan private sector. So especially if we are talking about creating an internationally competitive private companies in Sri Lanka, what is really important is to bring down the cost of doing business. And what we have really encountered is Sri Lanka's bureaucratic red tape and lack of transparency, accountability, and inefficiency of the procedures that businesses have to follow in order to trade, especially to export and import, is a significant problem that undermines the country's competitiveness, not just in terms of investment, but in terms of export performance. So every successive government really is talks a lot about improving our exports, and one of the areas that we feel that what Verite Research has really discovered is improving the regulatory efficiency, especially making it easy to comply with the procedures, reducing the time and cost of compliance, can immensely improve the Sri Lanka's export competitiveness.
These are all very common sense truths, and these are problems that we have known for a long time. Governments that have been in power, successive governments, current, previous, and even before that, have known about these problems. They have promised at various fora to cut the red tape, to make it easier for businesses to function, but it has not happened. What are the challenges to reforming these schemes?
Yes, so one of the most important things to understand is these opaque systems and lack of information actually benefits many people who knows how to navigate the system and to benefit from the system. So if you are a bureaucrat, especially this kind of the opacity and information paucity gives you and your ability to be the person who decides do you get a permit or not, and the discretionary power given to them of course gives them the ability to extract benefits outside the normal fees and payments that a business has to make.
At the same time, if you're a businessman who knows how to navigate the system, and if you know how to handle the bureaucrat, then
yes,
it could be very beneficial
so
to you.
This is really one of the things that we discovered during our research, that actually the current systems benefit incumbent businesses who have connections at high-level high-level bureaucrats, and who knows basically whom to contact, whom to pay maybe to get things done, which I mean, because they've been doing this for decades, some of them don't even see that there is a problem in the system. But this penalizes any new person from coming into the system, and also penalizes people without that kind of connection. And what we realize is these kind of bureaucratic processes which demand people to visit bureaucrats in person, especially disadvantageous to businesses located outside Western Province.
And quite silly during the digital era.
Definitely. So there is significant resistance, not just from the bureaucrats, maybe from politicians also who benefit from the system, and some of the current businesses that
Elements
are
of the
also
business
benefit
well.
from the system as well. So while you make lip service to reforming and cutting red tape, or even introducing technology and automated processes, it is a significant challenge, because you have to there will be significant resistance from people who are going to lose these perks and privileges they extract from the opaque systems that are currently in place.
So you could say that even with the government's sort of grand scheme as announced in the previous budget and has gotten underway now, Enterprise Sri Lanka, where the government is planning to create thousands of entrepreneurs who will then go on to create jobs, the success of that venture is almost wholly dependent, especially in terms of export businesses, export enterprises, is almost entirely dependent on these regulatory reforms.
And not only that, one of the other discoveries of ours is that there is no impact evaluation and monitoring and oversight. So for example, I would assume when import tax exemptions are introduced, every year the government would review the impact in terms of benefits as well as the revenue lost, and in order to decide should this be reformed, should these products still be in this list, do they still require the exemptions. So there has to be some monitoring and oversight. What we've discovered is we could not find, I mean basically we could not discover any documents or any information to indicate that there has been an assessment of impact and there is any system of monitoring and oversight. So when we filed a right to information request to Sri Lanka Customs saying we don't want to know the individuals, we only want to know how many greenhouses were imported in a given year under this scheme, and who are the basically under the import tax exemption scheme, and but unfortunately we were told you need to give us the HS codes, but Sri Lanka Customs is the only organization that would know the HS codes of the products that came under that scheme. And to me, I was like, if I'm asking, I have given the list of products and I have specified the government gazette, and I would assume that they should have statistics of these products under that tax exemption scheme, because it's very important in terms of managing government finance, because this is a record of how much revenue lost to the government as well. But the fact that they asked us for the HS codes indicate that to us is almost an indication that they are not maintaining these records, or that if they are or if it is the suggestion of their reluctance to share, then you would only thing you can do is you might assume there must be something fishy going on.
Do you feel that you may have uncovered a major revenue leak?
Possible. It is possible. It only can be assessed if we have access to all the imports that came under each tax exemption scheme, and I mean, you can understand if somebody, for example, says under this scheme there were 1,000 greenhouses. It's very easy for Ministry of Agriculture to see whether there has been 1,000 greenhouses.
Thank you, Subhashini. On that note, we're going for a quick break. On the other side, we'll be talking about import tax exemption schemes and trade. Welcome back to In Focus. We're in conversation with Subhashini Abhay Singh, Research Director at Pete Research. Subhashini, I'm about to move on to your pet area, where I expect that you will be in your element, trade. So we were talking about import tax exemption schemes. The introduction of free trade agreements, that the Singapore-Sri Lanka Free Trade Agreement for one, and now the government, the trade agreements that are in the pipeline, including with ETCA and the proposed FTA with China as well. Do you feel that the introduction of these bilateral trade agreements will help the regulatory process, will help sort of mitigate the weaknesses that you have identified in, for example, import tax exemption schemes?
So one of the why we require import tax exemption schemes in the first place is because we have import taxes. So if you don't, for example, if I can, why can't the government simply say all greenhouses imported into the country are duty free? One would assume, why do you require someone to take a recommendation letter from Ministry of Agriculture? But when you look at the technical side of it, you understand greenhouses do not come in one. Greenhouses contain actually lot of material that are under import duty. For example, you can bundle polythene, tubes, various other nuts and bolts that form a part of this greenhouse, and you can actually import other stuff saying that this is a greenhouse, because customs is not going to dismantle it and erect a greenhouse in customs to check whether this is actually a greenhouse, right? So that is exactly the reason that you actually require a recommendation letter of misuse, because of, it can be misused. So all the requirements of recommendations letters and all these approvals become redundant if we don't have to pay import taxes at the point of import. So it is what free trade agreements to some extent try to do, is remove these taxes, but then this is done on a bilateral basis for individual countries, right? So it's not going to again take away the problem of people wanting to use these tax exemption schemes to evade taxes, because it's not, we economists call this unilateral liberalization. It is not a unilateral liberalization, and that still creates room for people. If I'm importing from any other country other than these countries, I would still have to follow this process of getting recommendation letters and approvals.
Given what we were talking about during the previous segment of the program about the resistance that anyone who wants to sort of change or reform this process will come across, is there a sort of a logical common sense pathway through which these reforms can be achieved, or is it just a matter of you need to have the will?
Yes, so actually I'm sure you would have discussed in your program these massive projects like single window, where all border procedures, so any importer and exporter has to deal with maybe 30 different agencies at various stages to get various approvals. So you basically automate all of them and link all of them, so that prevents you from having to physically go to places or physically carry documents. So these kind of projects, actually not just in Sri Lanka, in every country, if you read the literature, is faced with significant resistance. And you actually use the right word. It has been the political will at the highest level in countries like Malaysia and other places. They're saying the Prime Minister, the President made this a priority project because they realized this is critical for their export success in the world. And they drove this project and made sure everyone fell in line. And what we've seen is, what I have been frequently saying is, unfortunately in Sri Lanka, these kind of projects have become the responsibility of a single line agency or a line ministry, which sometimes do not necessarily have the incentive or motivation to see it through, because they are the ones who are going to lose it. from having the systems in place. So that is why, despite speaking about automating board agencies and streamlining the processes for decades, Sri Lanka has made very poor progress in comparison to most other countries in the region.
If you take, for example, if you take even at the BOI, at the Information and Communication Technology, at ICTA as well, you have individual officials who are pushing for this. But do you feel that that level of enthusiasm is absent in the political leadership, specifically, as you mentioned, at the highest levels, the Prime Minister, the President?
So what we have seen is, I mean, they seem interested, but I don't think they realize that this cannot be delivered by few officers or even one or two agencies, that this has to be a national initiative. Because when you're talking about even Board of Investment or export and import, what we are talking about multiple agencies falling under multiple ministries. So if I'm, for example, if I'm Board of Investment, my ministry is Ministry of International Trade, but for this process to happen, to be streamlined, I need Environment Ministry support, I need Ministry of Industry and Commerce support, I need even the Provincial Council support, but Board of Investment does not necessarily have the authority to demand or to give instructions that you need to follow or reform your processes. So especially in projects like this, where you have to make sure 15 different ministries all think alike, it has to be driven at a Prime Minister or at the level of the Prime Minister or the President for it to really deliver.
Thank you very much, Subhashini. Very insightful conversation on regulatory ineffectiveness, not only with import tax exemption schemes, but also across the board. Thank you again for coming on the program. We hope you found that very interesting as well, especially if you're a policymaker who's tuning in. At the end of the day, the delivery will depend on the political buy-in at the highest level of government. Thank you very much. Good night and good luck.